Good evening. This is Curtis.
How you doing, Curtis?
All right. How you doing, Jonathan?
Not too bad.
All right. Hey, Donovan. How you doing?
What's up, Coop?
Hey guys.
You look good in blue.
Good
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hey, Chris.
This evening. Good evening. Hey, Curtis, I'm testing my headphones. Can you say something?
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. When Mr. Brown jumps on, before we adopt the agenda, I'll be making one correction. It's a chart on one of the items and it was a PDF. So Mrs. Crumley wasn't able to change it for me to add a description to one of the line items. So I'll make that change.
Sounds good.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
Before we get started, I don't know if Mr. Riley and the other principals are able to talk during the meeting or if they're just listening in. I would like to congratulate Mr. Riley on the most creative use of the math, given the building attendance numbers for this report. He chose to use 100% attendance for the past 2 months, whereas the other principals decided not to. And as a result, he met all the district goals as well as the building goals. Everyone else came very close, but he exceeded them by adding those numbers in there. So congrats, activity.
I think Mr. Riley has been accused of being creative at least once before.
It worked for him this time, so.
It's like the most awkward 5 minutes where we're all in a Brady Bunch gallery staring at each other. No one, because it's recorded and live, no one really wants to say anything, and I get that.
Nice background, Curtis.
Oh, thank you. I have quite a few Ohio State backgrounds. This one seems to be one of my favorites.
It is nice.
I haven't figured out how to do that yet, so you get what you get with me.
Well, Mr. Brown, you are right side up.
Well, that's a good.
I saw when you logged on, we weren't.
Nice background, Curtis.
Mr.
Thank
Brown,
you.
I'll be making a correction to the agenda after you get a motion and a second and have it on the floor.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Homan.
Okay, by my count, it appears we have everyone, and it appears it's time to start the meeting. So I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Brooks,
Here.
Mr. Cooper,
Here.
Mr. Homan, Mr. Stahl.
Here.
Okay, will you please join me in a period of meditation and the pledge, please? Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion to consider the agenda as presented for this meeting.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Stahl, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Cooper? Ms. Blend, you indicated there was a correction to the agenda.
Yes, item 7.17 is missing a description on the appropriations for Fund 467. That description should stay the Student Wellness and Success Funds. My apologies, I inadvertently provided a PDF to Mrs. Crumley and she was unable to make that correction for me.
So you said image that we have, there should be an line.
What was it called again? The Student Services Fund?
Student Wellness and Success Funds.
All right.
And the chart shows Fund 467, but the description of that fund is missing.
Okay, if there are no objections, we'll accept that modification with acclamation. Okay. Seeing none, any other questions, comments, or concerns regarding the agenda for this evening? If not, roll call, please.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Homan,
Yep.
Mr. Stahl.
Yes.
Everyone's received a copy of the minutes of the previous meeting for the 12th of May. If you've had a chance to read those, do I have a motion to consider and approve those minutes as presented?
So moved.
Mr. Brooks, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Mr. Cooper? Any comments, questions, or concerns or changes? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Homan,
Yes.
Mr. Stahl,
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 6 on the agenda. Did we have anyone request public participation for this evening?
No, we did not.
Okay, thank you.
The
All right,
one, I'm sorry, Mr. Brown. I would just like to share on behalf of Mr. Boyd, his appreciation, I think, for our amicable negotiations and how we've been able to work together as we're planning for the upcoming school year.
Thank you.
I did tell him I was going to make up other things that were much more complimentary to Mrs. Blend and myself, but that's what he actually said.
All right, well, good. Thank you. We'll move on to item 7 on the agenda, Treasury Report.
Well, I would just like to go over my treasurer's notes that I provided to you. I know that we approved purchase of a new software last month. So we've begun that preparation. It's going to be a lengthy process. It'll be wonderful once the conversion's done. It'll take approximately 6 months and we'll go live in January. We're also exploring an added option for parents to make online payments for items other than food service. Right now, that is only available for their meal payments. So we're looking forward to trying to roll that out July 1. That should make things a lot easier for parents.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to consider routine items 7.1 through 7.8?
So moved.
So moved.
Mr. Holman, I'll take a second for Mr. Brooks. Thank you. Discussion?
I'd like to go over the variance report with you. There's not a lot of variance this month. The revenue is pretty much right on target. Really no notable change from what we projected in our latest forecast. Expenditures at the end of May, we're running under approximately $100,000. And I see in my notes, I typed $100. That's $100,000. And I tried to take a look ahead since we're nearing the end of June. And I anticipate once the final bills are paid this next week and all the remaining encumbrances are closed out, we should add about an additional $500,000 or so to our ending balance. And that is largely due to the shutdown and the fact that we have been out of the school building without students and staff since mid-March. So that's good news for a bad reason, but that's good news that will add to our ending cash balance.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, or concerns regarding routine items 7.1 through 7.8? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Holman,
Yes.
Mr. Stahl,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Brooks.
Yes.
Okay, moving on. Do I have a motion to consider business items 7.9 through 7.17?
Make a motion.
Mr. Stahl, do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Cooper, discussion?
I don't need to read all these items to you. You'll see that these items include our final appropriations, as is customary every year at this time, as well as temporary appropriations to begin our new fiscal year. You'll see that we also have a contract in here. It's a 3-year term for a new online student academic software that we'll use for credit recovery, initial credit, and I believe for a couple of core classes at the middle school. And there's a transfer on here, of course, to food service. We all expected that. So I was able to finalize that number. That really will leave food service with just about zero going into the new fiscal year.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to say I regret to hear the passing of alum Jeff Ricker. He was a 79 grad. He was also a retired Air Force member. And we thank the Groves for their donation to the school and his memory. Any other questions, comments, or concerns on through 7.9 through 7.17? Okay, seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Holman,
Yes.
Mr. Stahl,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kramer?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I wanted to, of course, update the board on our reopening planning, which has occupied a large amount of our time over these last couple of months, and especially the month of June. We did receive some pretty good news today. As you know, the governor at the end of last week announced that schools were going to be able to provide for full contact practices. And so as being the process that we've had to follow, we worked over the weekend to update our facilities athletics plan for the summer and resubmit to Madison County Public Health. That plan was approved earlier this morning and communicated to our coaches. It'll be communicated to our community early tomorrow. And we have some things in the works so that we are able to have open up our practices to have full contact practices with health and safety guidelines put into place. So that is some particularly good news for us. Our first 2 phases, as we brought students back on campus, has gone pretty well. We've haven't really had any instances where we have found the health and safety guidelines of which we put in place were difficult to follow or were not being adhered to. So we're pretty confident that the phase 3, as we move and progress there, we're able to meet those expectations that were approved earlier this morning. We also completed or asked our parents and our teachers to complete surveys a few weeks ago. We've had the opportunity to review the results of those surveys. Again, that will be communicated as well out tomorrow morning. We were lucky to receive about 530 plus responses from our parents in regards to our survey, and about 90 responses from our teachers, and really looking for their dispositions about the upcoming year. Parents, by and large, the majority were interested in sending their students back. There was a large contingent, about a third, that wanted to reserve judgment until they knew what exactly the health and safety guidelines that schools would be required to meet would be, what exactly those requirements would be. And there was a small but significant contingent, about 12% of families who responded to the survey who were very concerned with sending their students back at the beginning of the school year. And so as we look at options for our reopening plan, we are certainly keeping into mind those responses in that survey. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. Our teachers, like I said, we had 90 teachers that were able to respond to the survey as well. We asked our teachers about their comfort levels in returning to school, as well as their comfort levels with the different modalities that we would be looking at teaching. And so we were able to gather some good information from their responses as we try to line up our teachers and our resources, our human resources, with the needs of our students as they are changing. So right now we're still looking at a number of options, and it's really tied to our teacher attendance, because we would not be able to provide on-campus instruction if we are unable to keep a high teacher attendance rate. And so our planning includes probably 3 or 4 options in between, all day, every day, all students on campus, with what we ended the 4th quarter with. Obviously, I think it's our belief that as long as we can provide the health and safety guidelines, and those are approved by Madison County Public Health, we would like to have students safely on campus. And we also, though, realize that some families would be uncomfortable with that. So we are building back some virtual options for families that can be provided by our district. Thanks to Mr. Cooper. He is sitting on this ad hoc committee for us that we are meeting weekly, and putting together some draft plans, draft plan that I would have been able to share with the board in advance, as we've kind of looked at that as a work in progress. The Ohio Department of Education has shared that any day now, they will be releasing some guidance for school districts about reopening. And so this has been a tough plan. We want to provide answers as quickly as we can to our community about what the beginning of the school year is going to look like. In the same respect, we don't know all the parameters in which we are going to be required to meet. And so we want to plan quickly, but we also want not to put the cart in front of the horse and then have to backtrack and make different plans for criteria that we were unaware of. So we're trying to move, I think, in a sensible way. hopefully we get that guidance and we can progress forward. Our goal is by the middle of July, we're able to share with families what the opening of school would most likely look like. Any particular questions that I can artfully dodge because I may or may not have the guidance to answer those yet?
I have a quick question, and you might touch on this later, but with respect to the survey, did you find any trends based upon grade level that there was a higher or lower comfort with returning to campus depending on the building or grade level of the students?
Well, I can speak actually a little bit to maybe this gives you a little bit more light. Those families that were interested in possibly seeking a blended or a virtual option, even if an on-campus option was available to them, was pretty evenly distributed between elementary, middle school, and high school. Now, of course, we have a little over 2,200 students attending. The response to the survey was about 25%, which, as surveys go, is not too bad, actually. So we know it's not representative of every student, but the trends were pretty evenly distributed across those buildings. And so in our planning, we know that we have to have some options available both in the elementary, middle school, and high school. Of course, we've had London Unlimited, our blended option that's been available for 3 or 4 years, but that's been directed primarily to the high school with some middle school students working within that as essentially pilots over the last 2 years.
Thank you.
Like I said, I appreciate Mr. Cooper providing his input into that committee. Mr. Cook from the health department also sits in, as well as some representative groups who are tasked with also going out and seeking some information and some opinions from some of our other stakeholders as well.
Thank you. I appreciate all the effort you've put into this, Dr. Kramer, and the staff, the principals, Kylie and her statistics. And I was surprised. I don't know if you guys were on the feedback that we had received thus far on the survey. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of parents giving feedback and teachers. So I think that helps out a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kramer. All right, we'll move on to the policy and governance section. Do I have a motion to approve policy governance items 8.1?
So moved.
Mr. Brooks, do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Cooper, discussion?
No real changes except for the recommendations made by Mr. Brooks to delete some outdated language.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Stahl,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Holman. I read his lips. He said yes.
All right, thank you. We have a motion to consider business item recommendations 8.2 through 8.5.
Make a motion.
Mr. Stahl, do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Mr. Holman.
Second by Mr. Cooper. Question, comments?
8.2 is a recommendation to approve our contract with Madison County Public Health. This is for nursing services. If you remember, we actually this past year added an additional nurse using our state student wellness funds. The contract that appears in front of the board it does not represent an increase in funding from last year's contract, so it's the same. 8.3 and 8.4 are recommendations to approve new negotiated agreements that for a period of 1 year with both associations. Appreciate both the LEA and OPSI in our, I think I've used the word amicable, but that's very apt to describe sitting down, and very appreciate the collaboration in completing this work. And 8.5 is a recommendation to approve a high school diploma for and this would date back to 2019. And this is for a student who participated in Project Search, who was a transfer student from another district.
All right, any other questions or comments regarding items 8.2 through 8.5? Okay, seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Holman,
Yes.
Mr. Stahl.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to personnel recommendations. Do I have a motion to consider personnel recommendations 8.6 through 8.35?
So moved.
Mr. Holman, do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Brooks? Discussion?
8.6 through 8.35. And that is pretty typical for a June agenda. As you can tell from the number of recommendations there, we are in the height of staffing season. I did have several questions about the resignations, and I would say I would provide an answer in a couple of ways. One, it's been 6 weeks since our last meeting, and so that extra couple of weeks has allowed many districts just like us are working to fill open positions. And this year, similar to in years past, we did lose a handful of very good educators to some suburban Columbus school districts. The recommendations in front of you include 9 licensed recommendations to hire and 10 licensed resignations.
It's always tough to see folks go, but we certainly thank them for their hard work and dedicated service while they were part of the London family. So any other questions or comments regarding personnel recommendations 8.6 through 8.35? Okay, seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Holman,
Yes.
Mr. Stahl,
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to board rep and liaison reports. You indicated, Dr. Kramer, you had some additional comments related to the school year start.
Well, given in my superintendent update, Mr. Brown.
Okay, I thought there was a little more to come, but we'll go ahead and move on. London City School Safety Committee.
I think Dr. Kramer already covered that, what we're doing in the restart process.
Okay, thank you. Tax Abatement Committee.
Nothing to report.
Okay, the London Foundation, no meetings. We'll meet again in February. BAC Liaison, we have a meeting scheduled for July. Is that correct, Dr. Kramer?
That is, you have should have the Zoom invite, and I believe that meeting is scheduled for July 8th.
The OSBA Central Region,
Nothing to report.
okay. Facilities and Finance Committee,
Nothing.
tolls, Mr. Brooks.
Not much to share since our last London meeting. We had, certification virtually, and then a regular meeting May 20th with rather routine items on the agenda. And our next meeting is Thursday of this week. And at this time, we're planning to meet in person, socially distancing in an alternate location on Toll's campus. So that's really it.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm not aware of the need for an executive session. Dr. Kramer, does anyone have a need for an executive session?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. I would just like to thank, if there's no need for an executive session, I would like to thank everyone on their efforts for the restart plan that we're putting in place. And I understand the flexibility that you're going over, which is much needed and necessary in this time, but it takes a great deal of work to try and forecast all of the potential issues that we're having to deal with. And I'm certain the families that have responded have expressed that as well. And it's appreciated, the time and effort to put this together and to provide the best opportunities for everyone. So again, thank you all for doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
And if there's nothing else, to have a motion for adjournment,
Make a motion.
Moved.
Mr. Stahl, second by Mr. Holman. Favor, signal by saying aye.
All
All
right.
right.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Bye,
night.
everyone.
Bye.